PR Connections Radio presents.
Hello, everyone, and everybody who is watching on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. My name is Ian Rakelli, and it is going to be a fantastic show. We're doing a little bit different here on this episode, as we are going to be interviewing Brian Gardner from We Have the Power, and we are going to be going over the world of NASCAR, auto racing, the world of motorsport, and it's always a fantastic time to talk about, especially with the playoff situation.
Coming right up
in a little bit. But Brian Gardner, you are my guest at this time. You do a show on PR Connections Radio as well with We Have the Power. How's it going, Brian?
Very good. It's nice to get off the politics for a while and talk about something I've followed since since Ford tried to win Le Mans the first time in '64. I've been watching racing. And so it's been pretty fun. And now I've become quite a NASCAR fan and a Ford fan, but we'll still talk about other Chevy and Toyota, how they're doing too as well, you know.
I'm glad that you mentioned Ford. I'm glad you mentioned Ford, because do you ever watch that film, by the way, the Ford versus Ferrari, where they had the film about them trying to win Le Mans?
That was really good. Yeah, I did watch that with my son. We watched that. Yeah, that was good. It was very good. It was, really tough for them to beat Ferrari, who was so entrenched. And, those cars take a beating. They go 24 hours without a break. Now, in recent years, Audi has been able to push the rules and change transmissions and all that, which I don't like. And in the, 66, 65, you had to finish with the same engine, the same transmission. You certainly could change the wheels and drivers, but I don't like that idea of the car wins and they have it where it's so easy to change the transmission that they can do it and still win the race, because you want to think that it's an endurance race. Can their transmission stand up to the grueling 8-mile track over a 24-hour period? That's what I like about NASCAR, because there's no way you could change the transmission fast enough to win a NASCAR race. You got to race with what you bring. And then I know in the trucks they're using a spec engine, and I understand for cost savings they had to do that. But it's nice to see in the top tier that it's still a Ford, Chevy, or Toyota engine in those cars.
Yeah, and I think right now with the horsepower, they're doing about 500, 550. I know they even had a 650 package at certain tracks, but right now it's about a 500 horsepower, 550 horsepower.
Right. And obviously watching motorsports as long as I have, I've seen many drivers lose their life in terrible accidents. The sport has become so much safer with the safer barriers, with the Hans device, with other, even there's a new bar going across the top because Ryan Newman, his car got crushed a little bit, and they call it the Newman bar now.
Yeah, the Newman bar. Yeah, just like the Petty bar. Back in the 1960s, they had a bar named for Richard Petty. Yeah. Yeah,
and I don't want to see drivers drive crazy because they think, well, I can't get hurt. I still want them to drive respectfully and pass properly and try to win. But it's great that if there is something that happens, that they're safer than ever before,
I mean, the best part about racing is the technology side, especially trying to get in advance. If you have the best spotters, the best, chief engineers, the best pit crew, like if you're someone who has all the advancements in terms of technology, that's what I love about racing, regardless if it's Formula One, IndyCar, NASCAR. You have some of the best minds helping out these drivers, and I feel like they don't get enough respect. The fact that they spend hours and hours and even weeks building these cars, try to go out to the event and win.
Right. And a novice might say, well, what's wrong with Goodyear? Can't they make a tire that would last 500 miles so they don't have to come in and change their tires? But that's the whole point. They make them so they don't last very long, so that then it becomes a chess game of, well, are you beating up your tires? How are you going to, and I like that.
Same with right. Yeah.
Same with Formula One, those tires aren't going to last that long. And that shuffles the leaders. And that's a good thing, because Goodyear could certainly make a tire that would last. But then it's like, it takes takes all of the excitement of, can the pit crew handle what they have to do properly, you know?
All right, so let's ask it this way. So since you
Yeah.
mentioned the tires, now
Yeah.
Pirelli, they have 5 different compounds in Formula One. They have,
Right.
you know, their 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, if you want a soft compound, it's a lot much quicker, but it's going to go away a lot more quicker.
Right.
Whereas if you have a hard compound, it's not going to be as fast, but it's going to stay on the track a lot longer.
Right.
I know a lot of NASCAR fans have talked about maybe going to that type of format in NASCAR, maybe having different tire compounds in NASCAR. Do you think that's a great idea, or would you kind of stay away from that? Because people are trying to figure out ways to change it up in NASCAR.
Yeah, I think because of the type of racing, we should stay away from that. Formula One is different. I think having the tires equal and forcing the drivers to drive carefully is better than having a tire that will wear out quickly, but they can get ahead of the pack and then dive into the pits and get a longer lasting tire. That doesn't really speak to driver proficiency to me. I'd much rather have all the tires are the same. Hey, Giorgio, if you blister your tires, you're going to be coming in sooner than Davey, so you better be careful, you know.
Right, don't flat spot them, right.
Yeah, or don't abuse them, you know. So what I put together from a Ford viewpoint a little bit is some interesting statistics, and one statistic that's just for fun. But let me go over a couple of these things. Just to go back to 2022, Ford scored 9 wins. So far in 2023, they have won the last 3, so they're up to 5 wins. In the first 10 races, Daytona through Talladega, this doesn't take in the race that McDowell just won, Ford's had a 23.9 average finishing position, and they scored 1 win during those races, Logano and Atlanta. 23.9 is not very good. But in the second 10 races, Dover through Atlanta, including the All-Star race, Ford's bumped it up to 18.9 average finishing position. Again, 1 win, Blaney at Charlotte. In the last 4 races before McDowell's win, Ford's had an average of 18.25 finishing position and 2 wins, Buescher at Richmond and Michigan. So they've dropped it from 23, which isn't a very good average, to about 18. And of course, with McDowell winning, that probably maybe took it to 17. But it shows that Fords are struggling with this new car, you know. In 2022, Fords won 9 times, which was an improvement over 2021's 7 wins. But to beat the 2022 total, this year Fords would have to win 6 more races. There are just 13 races until the end of the season, so Fords would have to win about half of the remaining races. And just to balance it out for people that aren't Ford fans, last year Toyota scored 8 wins, which was down from their total of 10 in 2021. This year they have 7 wins. They need just 2 more wins to top their 2022 total and 4 more to top their 2021 total. Last year, Chevy won 19 races, 1 win up from their total in 2021 of 18. This year, they have 13 wins, and they are in a similar position to the Ford team. Chevy would have to win 7 more races to top 2022's total. So if you look at the Ford drivers, all of them have scored at least 1 top 10 this year, with Preece in car 41, with Stuart Haas finally getting his first top 10, a 5th at Richmond. Only Blaney, Logano, and Buescher, and now McDonnell, have won this year in Fords. Now, here's the number fun that I was telling you about. This has nothing to do with driver proficiency, nothing to do with how the manufacturers are doing, but it's kind of fun to look at this. The only drivers to score finishing positions, which are the same number as their car numbers, are Blaney, number 21, at 21st at Nashville, Harvick, number 4, 4th 2 times at New Hampshire and Pocono, and Keselowski, number 6, 2 times at Atlanta and Richmond, and Buescher, number 17, a 17th at Kansas. Just kind of fun to look at that. I have some other statistics that we'll go over in a little while, but that's just some things I put together from taking a look at this year so far.
I mean, it's definitely been very interesting and looking at all the analytics and numbers that you just listed. And I know that there's an immaculate grid that a lot of people are doing where they're taking the numbers and they're finishing, and if they're finishing order, it's always fun to look at and watch.
Yeah. I do that every year. I have a chart. Yeah.
Yeah, that grid is absolutely amazing. Now, since you are talking about Ford, now there is a rumor going around the garage in NASCAR that Ford actually wants to add more teams now. You know, they have Penske, you have Roush, you have the Wood brothers. They've been there forever. And then you have Front Row Motorsports. Yeah. Well, there has been reports coming out that they want to add 1 to 2 more teams in the next upcoming years. And there's been a lot of speculation. Okay, who could that be? Who are some teams that are disgruntled at Chevy? Maybe there's some teams disgruntled at Toyota. Right. But Brian, in your mind, what would be a team that you would say Ford maybe could be talking to that would be like, that makes a lot of sense for them to try to want to go over to Ford and go over to the bow ties over there?
See, I don't think the teams that are doing reasonably well or very well would be good candidates because they're going to come over to Ford, and if it doesn't click right away, they're going to get disgruntled. But taking other teams, I don't have the names necessarily in front of me, but taking the teams that are Chevy or Toyota teams that seem to be struggling, I think would be a good bet for Ford because I think they could help them to do much better. And you may be able to come up with some of the names of those. There's a couple of Chevy teams that I wish I had their names on the tip of my tongue to say that are struggling right now. And if you remember who those are, we can talk about them. But that's the teams that I believe would be good ones for Ford. And then there's the talk that Stewart-Haas may want to leave, but Tony Stewart did say our contract says we drive Ford, so apparently they're staying.
So about the Stewart-Haas, the reason why it's been happening is because of his NHRA team. In NHRA, he runs Dodges, and there's been all these reports about Dodges potentially coming back to NASCAR.
Yeah, they're not coming back. There's no way.
There's absolutely no way. They've gotten rid of the Charger, the Challenger's being stepped back.
That's the other thing,
Now, if he did go back to Chevy, which I understand is where he won all 3 of his championships, is where he started Stewart-Haas Racing, so that would make sense to go back to Chevy. But there are 2 teams on the Chevy end that could go to Ford that I do want to talk about. The first one is Spire Motorsports.
Now, that's the one that's the one I was trying to remember. Yeah, Spire. Go ahead.
And the reason why I want to mention it is Corey LaJoie signed long-term. The 77, they're trying to bring Carson Hocevar up to the Cup Series. Maybe he'll go to 77. And Andretti has been interested in buying the team for a while. The last 2 or 3 years, Mario Andretti, Michael Andretti, they want to join into NASCAR. And it would make sense if they have Gainbridge as a sponsor to go over to Ford and replace Stewart-Haas if they eventually leave.
Right. Yeah, that's the one I was trying to remember. Yeah, that would be a good team. Now, it's interesting to kind of visualize for the fun of it what manufacturers might join NASCAR because they are always interested in another manufacturer. But gosh, I'm trying to look at it. It cannot be Cadillac. They already got Chevy. It can't be really Kia. I mean, I don't know if they have. I'm not up on the engines Kia uses. It would be development for them to come up with a V8. I don't think they have a V8 car, do they?
They do not. But let me toss one out to you. Sure. What about Audi? Because Audi's wanting to get into Formula One. They want to get into all these different motorsports now. How about Audi getting into NASCAR and becoming
that would be really interesting. Wouldn't that be interesting? Now, Mercedes is another one that has V8s. So that's a possibility. I don't know of anybody else really, there's nobody that's British that seems to fit.
Yeah, Aston Martin wouldn't be interested in NASCAR.
And Jaguar just builds too few cars. They wouldn't really get benefit from their cars winning in NASCAR. It just doesn't fit. But Audi is a good one, yeah.
Yeah, Audi would definitely be really interesting. And once again, with the Andretti situation, they already have an Audi team in Formula E. Right. So they kind of would be able to connect there too.
Right. It would be cool to see Nissan if they had a V8 because they've got some pretty good looking cars.
Nissan, Honda, those are 2 that definitely could be if they do get a V8 program.
Yeah. Because doesn't Honda have a V8 already for their IndyCar work?
Yes, they do. Yeah, Honda already has a V8 program.
Maybe
They
that
have a lot of
could
things
transfer over,
right.
easily. It's just, I'm not sure that, if let's say you take the Honda Accord, if it's way smaller than the Mustang or any of those, then the teams would feel like, hey, it's going to cut through the air. So they may have to look at that and make sure the cars are similar in silhouette, because obviously the other teams would be mad if an Accord came into the series and it's smaller and cuts through the air faster, less of a block to the wind, so that would be
definitely with that aerodynamics. Everyone's going to obviously love aerodynamics, especially in racing.
Let me see what else I have here as far as statistics. Talking about numbers of cars in the top 10 Fords. In the first 10 races, Ford had an average of 3.5 cars in the top 10. I know there wasn't a half a car, but statistically, that's where it came. In the second 10 races of the year, Ford had an average of 3 cars. Now, that was a drop. Then in the last 4 races, Ford had an average of 4 cars in the top 10, an improvement that may or may not continue in the last races of the season and into the 10-race chase. Ford drivers with the most top 10s, it's a tie like there's never been before. Blaney and Logano have 12 top 10s each and 1 win each. Harvick has 11 top 10s. Keselowski has 10 top 10s. Buescher has 9 top 10s. Now, top 10s by teams, Penske, including Burton, 4 cars with the top 29 top 10s. Stewart-Haas, 4 cars, 20. RFK is doing really good. They only have 2 cars, and they have almost as many cars finishing in the top 10 as Stewart-Haas with 4 cars. So they have really done well since Keselowski came in there and took over and bought into that team. And
he's a very smart man. I'll say that. Keselowski's a very smart man, came from racing, good background. Yeah.
And Front Row Motorsports, with only 2 cars at the writing of this report, 11 top 10s, and they're having a very good year. And now they have 12 top 10s at least, because McDowell won the Indy Road Course. And Rick Ware has just 2 cars and just 3 top 10s. So that's kind of an interesting look at, the top 10s, because those are important for a sponsor. They want to have their car on the camera, and, usually the top 10 cars get their car pictured, so that's important.
Unless there's a caution in the back or something like that. But.
That's right. Yeah. The one that I'm concerned about the most in all of motorsports is Hailie Deegan, because right here, I want to share this with you. We can see this. I have a chart of where she has finished in the truck races. And although she did well in this last race right there, she's kind of been in this middle range. The blue pictures are the highest finishing Ford truck, but she's got to start getting into this range, because I'm concerned that the team is going to say, hey, the other drivers in our team are consistently finishing higher than you. Do we really want to re-sign you? And so,
Well, I think the situation with Hailie Deegan, and by the way, I've gotten to meet her before. I've actually gotten to talk to her a few times. She is a very nice person, by the way, Hailie Deegan.
Oh, good. I like her a lot too. Yeah.
But I will say this about Hailie Deegan, I've said this before, is because she's more suited to dirts, and because of her background in the modified division out there in the Lucas Oil Off-Road Series, if you've watched her in SRX when she's driving at Knoxville and Eldora, it's clear that she's more comfortable driving on dirt than she is driving in stock cars. Right. Now, there's been reports coming out that she is maybe going up to Xfinity Series. There talks about her maybe going to Stewart-Haas, going to SS Greenlight, potentially going to a team in Xfinity next year. And if she does, great for her. I'm happy for her. She's still, in her early 20s. She still has a lot of time left to be in NASCAR. I think the situation is she's just not really suited for the truck series. The truck series is a lot different than Xfinity Series. The weight of the car, the right-run sway bar, the suspensions, everything that the truck series has. the weight is very different than what Xfinity is.
I think she would do well in Xfinity. That's what I think she needs to do, because the truck driving, the guys are kind of brutal. Not that she's weak. I'm not saying that women are weak or she's weak. What I'm saying is she doesn't drive like that.
It's more of an aggressive series. Yes.
Yeah. And so I think if they're smart, they will find a way to get her in Xfinity. And then
I think the biggest issue is sponsorship, though. I think she even mentioned in an interview that it takes about $5 million to be on a good Truck Series team, and then to be on a good Xfinity team is about $10 million a year.
She's sponsored by Craftsman, but that's the whole series. It's Craftsman.
Yeah.
So does she have a particular sponsor? I forget.
So I know Pristine Auctions. I know they sponsor her, like kind of on the quarter panel. And I know Monster Energy, like she's done commercials with them in the past.
Okay, good.
So I think that she would be able to find some sponsorship, but for an entire year, $10 million, that's a lot of money.
Yeah. You know, like people like M&M's pulled out of NASCAR racing. I think they felt like they got their money's worth, which they did. Their cars ran up front. But it was sad to see them pull out because, you know, M&M's can be an item that's at the track and it seems a natural. Whereas if you're, a high profile car filter company, well, you can't really hand your filters out at the racetrack, you know.
Oh, but it still matters though. Trust me.
I understand.
It's just my entire life.
M&M seemed like M&M seemed like such a perfect match because they could always have a stand and handing out bags of M&Ms promoting their product, you know. Well,
unfortunately, we're seeing with sponsors, and this is actually a good segue. You know, as I'm your host, Ian Rakelli, we're interviewing Brian Gardner from We Have the Power. We Have the Power. And as we were talking about NASCAR here on the show, and people have noticed that the kind of the mainstay sponsors in NASCAR are starting to slowly fade away or starting to slowly kind of pull back from the sport. We're seeing with FedEx, for example. FedEx used to sponsor Denny Hamlin every single race. He used to be there on his car the entire 36 races. Now I think they're only doing 18 to 24 races a year. So they're slowly pushing back their sponsorships with Joe Gibbs Racing. You said with M&M's, Budweiser, that was there for 30 plus years. Now Busch Beers is on Kevin Harvick's car, and we'll see what happens moving forward. But what kind of statement does that tell you as a NASCAR fan? They're seeing all of these sponsors like M&M's and Budweiser and these sponsors who have been there since the 80s and 90s. They're not being there anymore.
Well, what's interesting to me is I know that I watch Out of the Groove a lot, and he talks about the fact that the racetracks are full, the viewing numbers are up, and for this to be the time when sponsors would be pulling out makes me kind of go, why are they pulling out now when there's more people getting interested in NASCAR? But it must be on the other end, they're getting pressure from distributors, or they're getting pressure from people eating more healthy, not buying as many M&Ms or something. And with FedEx, you know, you could walk down the street and do a survey, name a company that ships packages, UPS and FedEx. They really need to spend millions of dollars to keep their name in front of people? They certainly need to advertise on TV, because if Coca-Cola stopped advertising, you'd go, hey, is Coke still in business? You know, it's weird that they have to keep doing commercials, even though, you know, people know Coke, it's a household word, Pepsi, you know. But I think they're pulling back because they're going, hey, you know, we did really good. M&M's did really good. Now we can, maybe they've got some ideas on other promotion they're going to be doing. But I hope that doesn't continue, because I certainly want NASCAR to be well funded.
So my angle on it, and actually what my perspective would be, is I believe that with the prices going up and with how expensive motorsport is becoming now, and the fact that to be in a Cup Series ride, you have to have at least $20 million now. I think that's the estimated cost per year, is about $20 million in sponsorship. I think my perspective is these sponsors aren't backing out of NASCAR because of the ratings. They're not backing out because stands aren't being, not being sold out anymore. I think it's just becoming too expensive now. I mean, I remember back in the 90s and 2000s to be on a Busch Series team, I think like $500,000 a year was what the price was. Like if you want to do it in full 36 race season, you only had to spend $500,000. Well, now 20 years later, you got to spend $10 million just for an Xfinity ride. So.
Now that begs the question, why have the costs have gone up so much, and what can be done to bring the prices down of sponsoring a team so that we lure manufacturers and companies and sponsors back? So let's look at those two questions. Why has it gotten so expensive? I don't know how to answer it directly, but we have inflation going on in this country with rather lackluster leadership. I'm sorry. Okay.
Now, here's what I will say to answer that question, and it's a good question, by the way. When it comes to the next-gen car, I know that it was supposed to make it more of an even playing ground for all
and
the
cheaper.
It was supposed to make it cheaper. Yeah. However, there's people who have come out and said that might not be the case, because we're seeing now in NASCAR with all the parts and everything that's having to be put into NASCAR, and with the spending costs, with traveling costs, and all the fees that go into it, I actually think that it's not being as cost efficient as NASCAR says it is, because you're seeing all these teams actually still complaining about it.
Right. I mean, if you get on a plane today and you got on a plane 5 years ago before the pandemic, there is a difference in price because we do have inflation. Now, regardless of who gets into the White House next, and I'm not going to be very political, I'm going to be very neutral, but whoever gets in there is going to be tasked with getting this inflation under control. Families are struggling to get bread and milk in their house. Come on, that's not America. That shouldn't be like that. So hopefully,
I got you.
Yeah, hopefully we can have someone from either party realize that their duty is to, get this inflation under control.
So we have one last question before we get to the end of the show here with your host, Ian Rakelli. There's Brian Gardner from We Have the Power. And it was reported that Ford will be going to Formula One in 2025. And with us being Ford fans, I'm very excited to see that, the Ford be in Formula One for the first time since 2000 when they were with Jackie Stewart's team. Right. But Brian, what about you? How do you see Ford going into Formula One and teaming up with Red Bull, who has been winning the last 3 championships in F1?
It's kind of funny. When you got something working, we all know you're not supposed to change. So I've always been a Ford man. So I hope that they don't put Fords in their chassis and suddenly fall flat on their face. I mean, look what's happened to the Mercedes team. They were winning every single race. Now they hardly get on the podium. So things in Formula One do cycle through. But I'm excited because being 71 years young, I watched Jimmy Clark and all of them with the Ford Coupe, Climax engine and through the years, all the Ford engines, the Cosworth that won so many races. Mm-hmm. So I'm very excited to see Ford coming back into Formula One. Absolutely.
And do you think that's a possibility for more American teams to get into F1, or is it just going to be Ford for now, and we're just going to have to wait for more teams down the line?
I don't think Chevy would spread themselves as thin as being in, because Ford is not an Indy car. Chevy is. So that would be 3 major situations drawing money. I don't think they're going to do that. And there's really nobody else, American, who would get in. So I think it's going to be Ford for a while.
Yeah. And this last one, now he is not a car manufacturer, but he is a car owner, and he used to be in F1. What about Roger Penske? Because back in the day, back in the 70s and 80s, he used to be in F1, and him being in NASCAR, him owning IndyCar, maybe a possibility of him going over with Michael Andretti and Mario Andretti also trying to get into F1.
Yeah, there's a possibility. Now, with his age, he would probably defer most of that work to whoever is poised to take over Penske Racing. He might get into that, but I'll tell you, he's the type of guy that would go like this. Let me look at it. He moved this fast. Let me look at it and see what would really happen if he's not going to go, let's do it.
Right. He plays the long game. That's always been Roger Penske.
Well, look how successful he's been. My gosh. Please watch my show live Friday at 5 p.m. Pacific Coast time.
And of course, that is here on prconnectionsradio.com, the voice of new media. And subscribe to their social media at PR Connections Radio. And we have a show as well, Vegas Hockey Hub, Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to continue to do interviews with all of the guests that are here on PR Connections Radio. I have a bunch of them lined up. So you'll never know who's going to be on the show here.
That's right.
On
And go
PR
forward.
Connections Radio.
Go forward.
Absolutely. And until next time, have a good one here on prconnectionsradio.com, the voice of new media.